The Princess of Sunlight is one of the most divine figures in Dark Souls. She literally towers over Orlando, promising warmth and guidance in an otherwise cold and dying world. However, as the franchise continued, I've always felt that Gwynevere strayed further from the sunlight she sat in so beautifully, and partially to no fault of her own. She's introduced through a massive illusion in Orlando where she greets the chosen undead and offers the Lord Vessel, presenting herself as a kind maternal figure. The Princess of Sunlight is a symbol of fertility and benevolence, and her presence is tied to warmth. But Gwyn built Lordran's golden age not through honesty, but through a managed image of self-implemented divine order. He bound the flame to himself, crowned his children with radiant titles, and presented the gods as the only true beings of a otherwise quote-unquote perfect world, where Gwynevere fit neatly into the structure that Gwyn had created. Gwyn needed symbols that reassured the people so they would not seek any other paths. Gwynevere's identity may have been shaped less by her own choices and more by what the political machine that was Gwyn required her to be. If your father builds a false image of not only Orlando, but his entire flame, what does it mean to be raised as the deity meant to embody its future? Gwynevere famously grasped at the first sign of freedom after Gwyn sealed himself away in the kiln, leaving before the illusion of Orlando collapsed too far, which left only her pitiful brother Gwyndolin behind. Gwyndolin then created the gargantuan Sun Princess illusion to keep the dwindling population believing in Orlando's prosperity. But in truth, regardless of everything I have just said, we never meet Gwynevere at all, at any point in any of the games. She left Orlando long before the events of Dark Souls, and in Dark Souls 3, all that remains of her are her disgraced and honestly miserable children. She's both central and completely absent to the plot, and yet the impressions of Gwynevere are always very strong. Dark Souls 3 invoked the idea within me that Gwynevere's story becomes less about one woman's moral choices and more about somebody raised within a cell, defined by her father's need to remain on top. When Gwynevere married Flame God Flan, yes, I have to say that very slowly because every time I kept trying to say it, it would come out as a jumbled mess. This move very well may have been her first act of true independence, pursuing peace away from the decaying system of Lordran. If Gwynevere opposed Gwyn's regime, leaving could be seen as a refusal of the flame. However, if she agreed with the system that Gwyn created, but left anyway, only to return to Lothric, bringing misfortune onto her own children, it is closer to negligence, which directly fights against her title as the goddess of bounty and fertility. The statues of Gwynevere within the games show her with literal bountiful curves, and she's very well graced with a serene composure to her. And the Sun Princess ring, along with her miracles like bountiful sunlight, link her directly to healing. Everything about Gwynevere's iconography screams a nurturing, warm presence, but when you set that against her actions, or rather her absence, it is as if she was someone completely different. At the very peak of Gwyn's power, Seath began to create a obsessively particular system of misfortune. Gwynevere herself is never directly harmed by him and crucially never experimented on by Seath, but amongst the earliest victims of his experiments were the maidens of Gwynevere, specifically those closest to the Princess of Sunlight. These maidens, once mutilated, became Pisarca, those unfortunate serpent-like creatures in the archive's bottom level. Some of these Pisarca were likely sent to Seath when Gwynevere and Seath were wedded by Gwyn's command, perhaps to translate Gwynevere's miracles into magic, only to then be mutilated in his search for perfect crystal life, as it is no secret that Seath cared very little for Gwyn's age. So when the Lord of Sunlight offered his firstborn daughter, Seath accepted, as this daughter was one of the first pillars to power. Whether she liked it or not, this act of torture tied Gwynevere to Seath's atrocities despite fleeing with Flan after what must have felt like an entire flame of hell. Seath began the deconstruction of her life. This relentless perversion followed her into every rendition of the flame, just in the exact same way Seath's intelligence sought to corrupt every maid looking to uncover the graces of the archives. Gwynevere had a strong indent within the franchise, but Seath can often be found at even the deepest corners of Dark Souls. However, Gwynevere herself is never shown to intervene with any of the horrors that are so closely tied to her. Whether she was complicit or powerless is unclear. What is clear is that those near to her are vulnerable, even when Gwynevere herself is not. A goddess of bounty should stay to sustain the community they are a part of, yet she left on Orlando. A figure tied as closely to fertility as Gwynevere would presumably foster endless new generations. Alas, the only lineage she continued was her own. The people who gather around the supposed images of the Princess of Sunlight fall into despair without fail. If Gwynevere cared for flourishing communities, why build a flourishing community elsewhere, so far away from the kingdom that completely revered her? Either Gwynevere was massively misunderstood, or she was complicit in her own despair. Maybe she embraced her role symbolically, but had no real interest in the responsibilities it implied. Or maybe the fertility she represented wasn't meant for Lordran at all, but instead for the many worlds and flames beyond it. The Princess of Sunlight left, and what remained was a carefully curated image, just as Gwyn wanted, at the hands of Gwyndolin, who, for the most part of his younger years, was Gwyn's greatest puppet. So, was Gwynevere a good parent and a good person and a good goddess? There's no real definitive answer. She's presented as kind, but the version we meet is an illusion. She's associated with healing and fertility and warmth, but she left when her family and her city were crumbling. The sun left Lordran, and only Ash remained in Lothric. The Lothric royal family has somewhat close ties to Gwynevere, although mostly through fan theory crafting. The role of the Lothric children is steeped in divine expectation, although this time it is to the linking of the flame and not so much the upholding of the flame. They are born into a flame where to be royal is to be useless, and a kingdom that has placed the abyss as king. Prince Lothric is raised to become the sacrificial heir who will link the fire, continuing the cycle his self-inserted divine ancestor Gwyn began. Instead of embracing this role, he rejects it entirely. Older Prince Lorien chooses to suffer alongside him, both cursed by the expectations of their own bloodline. Gwynevere is either a gentle figure who chose a new path away from a corrupt legacy, or a negligent figure whose absence may have been one of the main reasons as to why Pontiff Sullivan could so easily malform her bloodline. Your interpretation, just like mine, depends on whether you view her departure as an act of true independence or pure abandonment. From the Duke's archives to the Lothric throne room, those tied to Gwynevere endure misery, while she herself remains preserved in beautiful memory and pristine illusion. The saddest part is that none of these tragedies directly involve her. None of these tragedies are her fault, but at the same time, she never took any form of action against them. The Princess of Sunlight remains a virgin to the events of her legacy, while the sun she represents scorches those who stand too close. Was Gwynevere a benevolent figure who chose a better future for herself, or a distant figure who left all of her responsibilities behind, only to then in the end return to Lothric, and perhaps destroy the flame once and for all as her very last act of independence? Until next time, praise the sun, or maybe not the sun.
Don't you dare let yourself go hollow, lest my time spent on you be wasted.